Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Christian Reeve podcast. Today's guest is a true crime author all the way from Texas and author of the Notorious Texas Swindler. Her name is Pepper Ann. Welcome to the show. How you doing?
Thank you. I'm doing good. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for
Oh,
inviting me.
I'm
Yeah.
so happy you're here. I'm so happy you're here. We're going to jump straight into this. There's a lot to cover. So for my listeners, I always jump straight into it anyway, but so to break this down, Pepper wrote this book called The Notorious Texas Swindler. It's about a gentleman called Bob Leach, who I understand you are related to as well, and we'll get to that later on. But basically, he was the head of an infamous gang called the Grayson County Five. Have I got that right?
Yes.
Yeah. And there's a lot to this. As I understand, they're basically a group of gentlemen who did a lot of crimes together. They ended up in jail, they got caught, and then they had this big infamous heist, which I've sort of broken down. I've got various questions for you about this. But that's kind of like the crux of it. And of course, they were quite difficult to capture and everything. And there's just so much to unpack with regards to just their interactions with each other as well. So I wanted to kind of split this into discussing the crime itself and how it went down, specifically the heist, and then we'll talk about your specific motivations for writing this book and you in general as a person, as my guest. So I think what we'll do is we'll jump straight into the crimes. So we'll go from the top. Basically, start with the capture and prosecution element. So around midnight on Monday, October 15th, 2001, Bob Leach and his accomplices, Lynn Gann, I think, so Lynn Gann, his other accomplices, surrendered and at the time had two hostages. Now, this is interesting for me because in this particular sort of scenario, they had hostages. It was just down to Gann and Leach. And as I understand, the rest of the gang had gone, they'd gone their separate ways. And it was just him and Leach. And as I understand, like, Leach was originally sort of the leader of this gang. But then I guess there was like some trouble in paradise. I don't know, like arguments in the ranks of who's the leader. And as I understand, like in this particular scenario, they were on different sides of the fence because Leach, I guess, wanted to cut his losses and just get out of this scenario as much as possible. Like, he was treating, from what I've read, was treating the hostages well, and Gant was kind of like the opposite of that. And I should paint a picture as well for everybody. So this is during a firefight that lasted many hours with the police, which, just on a side note, I couldn't quite believe how long it lasted. It was somewhere in the region of 8 to 10 hours or something. Is that right?
It was 8 hours.
Eight
It was an
hours.
8 hour shootout. Yeah. Or standoff. Yeah.
Like, how much ammo did they have? Like, oh my God.
Well, so what happened was so Bob and the other four fugitives, when they escaped the Grayson County Jail in Sherman, they took off, and when they were on the run, they were going to other individuals' homes, and they were stealing stuff. They were stealing weapons and stealing ammo from other people. So along the way, they had gathered up all of this, ammo and all the guns and everything. So when they got to the last stop, and Bob and Gant were together, and the other three kind of split and went separate directions, Bob and Gant ended up in Forestburg, which is where it's the house where they were when they held Vince and Irma hostage. That's the married couple. And then they just pulled out whatever guns they had, and they just started shooting, but they weren't doing it the whole time. In the beginning, when they first started, it was because law enforcement had pulled up, and they were following them because they spotted them. So they followed them, and Bob was driving the SUV. So he tore off, and he ended up pulling into the driveway of Vincent and Irma's home, and he came to a quick stop, and they got out and they got their guns and started shooting, and they were doing it to keep them away, I guess, keep law enforcement at bay. And then every once in a while, when it finally kind of calmed down and everything, every once in a while, Gant would go outside and shoot the guns at law enforcement
Like
while
to
Bob was
remind them, like, hey,
inside.
we're still here, man.
Yeah,
Like, what?
yeah. Like they needed to
Okay.
be reminded. They did, yeah.
Interesting.
So they weren't shooting the whole time, but
Right.
for, a majority of the time they were. But it was scary. It was scary for everyone involved. And the Vincent Nirma's family were there at the
Mm.
shootout in that area, and their stories are amazing. I have their stories in the book, and they're amazing. I'm very close to that family, and their versions of the story. It's heart wrenching because we can only imagine your parents are being held hostage, and you want to get to them, but you can't. There are these madmen holding them hostage. You don't know what to do. And then suddenly one of them is continually violent the whole time. And then another one decides to help them get out of the house and flee.
Right.
And
Leach
so,
was the one who helped them get out.
yeah.
I read in the police report that one of the police officers said everyone has a little bit of good in them. And as I understand, like out of the two of them, I think Leach might have been a little bit more aware of the scenario and like what's like they probably weren't going to get out of this either alive or free of the police. Like it's kind of a lose-lose kind of scenario. But and this is kind of what I wanted to understand more is where maybe both of their heads were at, because not only are their fates kind of sealed at this point and they're in totally different headspaces, like psychologically, but like, and we'll get to this later on, like their trials and everything, those went separate directions as well. But one thing I found really interesting is that eventually Leach actually shot Gant. Is that right?
He did. He shot him in the abdomen. I do want to say the individual that said that we uh, we all have a little good in us. That was actually Irma. She
Mm,
was the one. She was the wife, and when they
okay.
interviewed her, she was the one that said that. Um,
Sorry.
yeah, no, that's okay. That's all right. No worries. But yeah, so at the very end of of um, of the shootout, Vincent and Irma were out of the house, and Gant had fallen asleep. And then all of a sudden, he woke up. He was asleep on the couch because he'd had all the whiskey, and I mean, he passed out from all the liquor he'd consumed.
Hold on
So,
a second. Let's back up a second. They're in the middle of a shootout with the
mhm,
police for 8 hours, and Gant
mhm.
is just getting loaded and then just passes out. What?
Well, Bob was drinking too. They both were because they had stolen whiskey and all kinds of alcohol at the previous home that they were at because they had terrorized another family before they got to this
Right.
house.
Hmm.
And so they had taken the woman hostage. So before they took her, several counties over, um, they grabbed all the ammo, they grabbed, weapons, alcohol, anything they could get their hands on, and they put it in the SUV along with the woman.
Hmm.
And they took off. So when they got in the house, they had that alcohol, and they'd been drinking it. They'd been drinking while they were on the run, anyways, the
I
whole
just,
time.
I just don't understand this because, like, when they were the Grayson County Five, like all together, they sounded a lot more organized. And of course, I understand like when things break down, you don't have the benefit of maybe having a group mentality. Thing is less structured.
Mhm.
And clearly, out of Leach and Gant, Leach was much more level-headed about the situation in comparison with Gant, which probably also explains why he was the leader of the gang previously. Because it's like I don't know, Gant seems quite impulsive by comparison, and but for the life of me, I can't really understand the psychology of this. Like you're having a firefight with the police. Surely the objective is to get out, or sorry to put it bluntly, but like to die trying. Like there has to be some sort of plan there, even if it's a short, put together, not very good plan. Like that, I'm just stumped at that. Like what was going through their heads?
Well, I maybe can shed some light on this. So Bob ended up in the Grayson County Jail on charges of kidnapping and his girlfriend. He was married and he
Mhm.
had he had a girlfriend at the time. Um, and she had said that he had assaulted her.
Right.
And so he ended up and he violated his parole. So he and with all the cattle cons and everything going on. So that's how he ended up in the Grayson County Jail. Once he got in there, he managed to convince these other inmates to
Hmm.
help break him out. And the reason he wanted to get out is because he wanted to go and get revenge on the people who had done him wrong. They were
That's
involved
right.
in the crimes with him. Yeah, and they got away with it. And they're out still today committing
Really?
crimes. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. The ex wife, she's involved in an adoption agency, a worldwide adoption agency, and she oversees their finances. And she was overseeing the finances of all the cons that she and Bob and all the others were committing. So, so that's what led Bob to break out of the jail. He wanted to get out and he wanted to go back. He actually went to confront his ex-wife and she wouldn't answer the door. And I put in the book, there's proof that he was there, she knew it, and she lied. So it's all in the book. So that was why he wanted to break out, because he wanted to get even and say, hey, come on, you gotta fess up here. And when he went on the run with these other individuals from the jail, um, then that's when things went in a whole other direction. And I don't know, as far as a plan, he was the one who planned it all. And he knew what he wanted to do when he got out, but it just didn't play in his favor, I guess. And so that's when he and all the other inmates went in different, and that's when they ended up going in the direction that they did. And then once he got involved with a couple and the shootout and everything, I think he had said that was it. That's it. I'm done. This is not what I wanted.
Hmm.
And so that's when he started working with the authorities and trying to release Vincent and Irma. Once he did, then he was trying to get away from Gant. Now, Gant was passed out on the couch. Like I was saying, he was asleep on the couch and he woke up and he wanted to know where Vincent and Irma were at. And Bob told him, he said, we need to go. We need to leave. We need to walk out peacefully. And then that's when things took a turn.
Okay.
And that was when Bob pulled the gun. I don't know who pulled first. I don't know if Gant had his
Right.
gun. These are things I'm just not 100% sure. But Gant was very violent the whole time. And make no mistake about it, Bob was just as violent at
Hmm.
the previous residences and all the other places that they were at. Bob was involved in those crimes too. But something about Vincent and Irma, he just wasn't. I don't know. There was just something. I believe because I've met them. They remind me a lot of our family,
Mm.
and so I can't help but wonder if maybe there was a some kind of a connection for him. Maybe he just, I don't know. Maybe he viewed them as, I don't know, family. I don't know.
No, I get exactly what where you're coming from. I mean, there's a couple of things going through my head. Like, first of all, I mean, we've seen so many movies over the years of like similar kind of concepts where there's always like one or two people in a given group who, have that sense of morality and aren't really completely engaged with what's going on or completely detached. And then, of course, you got to think about the group mentality. Obviously, when you're a part of a group and you're committing crimes or even just mucking around or something like that. Sorry to put it like that in the context of this, but you know what I'm saying? Like people act differently in a group versus on their own.
Right. Yeah.
And I wonder that maybe because it was just Leach and Gant, Leach was kind of thinking, okay, this is, as you said earlier, not how I plan things. What's the best way of getting out of this scenario? Whereas I feel like, again, Gant was much more impulsive and kind of like, no, screw you, da, 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 da.
Mhm.
And that was something actually I wanted to ask you about before, was like how it came to be the shooting happened. But that makes a lot more sense to me than just like randomly. Like I was kind of like thinking, okay, if you got your accomplice, why would you shoot your accomplice kind of thing? Like there's got to be a reason for that. But if it's like Leach trying to appeal to Gant and Gant's being unresponsive and they get violent and it's like a mistake kind of thing, then that makes a lot more sense because it's like, okay, or maybe self-defense as well. That's an argument too. But
Well, yeah, I mean, coming from a family perspective of
mhm,
Bob's, he's a big guy.
right.
He's, well, 6 foot tall, and I mean, he's a big fella. And so I find it hard to believe that Gant Gant was mean. Gant was very mean,
Hmm.
mentally, and he was just a very mean person. But I just can't help but think that Bob could take care of himself, if that makes sense. I mean, he's a big guy, and
Sure, but if someone's
he can
coming
be
at you with a
mean.
gun or
Well,
you
yeah,
know what
but
I mean,
I don't
changes
know
things.
that. Yeah, and like I said, Gant was asleep on the couch, and I'm not saying Gant charged at Bob. He didn't do that. I just don't know if at the end, because I have several versions, I've interviewed law enforcement, and nobody was in the home at the time except
Hmm.
for Bob and Gant. So I do want to make that clear. Um, Gant had a gun, and Bob had a gun. Now, I don't know who drew first. I really don't. But all I know is that Gant woke up and he wanted to know where they're at and his tone and everything. And I don't know, depending on who you believe. And Bob is a compulsive liar.
Okay.
So anything I ask, I'd ask him, but I have to triple check everything with other individuals, law enforcement witnesses, just everyone, because I can't take him at his word. But
This is
for
something that
whatever reason, Bob pulled the gun and shot him in the abdomen. And there's different theories as to why. There's different theories. I don't know.
this is something I wanted to ask you about as well. Because you're cousins with Bob Leach, is that right?
Yes, that's right. And I did
Okay.
not know, and he didn't know about me. Neither one of us knew about the other one before I started writing this. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So you'd not met previous to
Mm-mm.
this.
Mm-mm. No,
Okay. Interesting. Okay.
no.
But you've spoken to him directly, is that right?
Oh, yes. Yeah. So what happened was my grandpa Riley passed away in
Sorry for your loss.
2006. Thank you. Thank you so much. And when he passed away, that's when I learned a little bit more about family history, learned about
See.
cousins that, didn't know about. So my mom and Bob's dad are cousins because my grandpa and Bob's grandpa were brothers. Now I didn't know about his grandpa and he didn't know about mine. So once I learned the story and I heard about Bob and I read online about the cattle rustling crimes that he was involved in with the other individuals that I exposed, something didn't add up. It just didn't make sense to me because, like I said, the individuals he was involved with are still out today committing crimes. And I could not understand for the life of me why he was the only one that ended up behind bars. He should be behind bars, but so should they. So then I reached out to him. He's in prison. And I said, I'm your cousin. I want to talk to you. I want to write this story. And then it went from there. That's how it happened.
How responsive was he? Did he take this positively or was he a bit cagey about it? Like, how did he feel about you writing this story and reaching out to him?
He wanted me to write the story.
Okay.
He wanted me to write it because there have been several individuals who've tried. Whatever reason, they didn't finish. It fell through, but I stayed with it. And I think he knew because it was coming from a family angle. It was coming from, I told him up front, I'm going to tell everything. And he said, I want you to. He didn't want me to know everything he did. He was embarrassed. He knew
Okay.
better. I mean,
Oh, that's interesting. So he's got a sense of remorse now.
well, he does, but I will say this, he is angry. He's very angry right now. I think if there is ever any kind of justice regarding everything, then maybe he can be a little more remorseful, if that makes sense. He's angry because his ex-wife, like I said, was overseeing all the financial aspects of all the cons that they were running. And then she is out and about today and still committing crimes, working with children and churches. And so were all the other individuals. There's a big crime ring here. And he's angry. He's told me that he said, I'm not the only one who's supposed to be in here. And I think he knew that the reason I wanted to write the story is because I wanted to pull all that out and expose it. And so there was a relief for him, for me to do this.
I'm gonna say something that might come across a little bit controversial, but there's a reason why I'm gonna say it. So, a couple of things. Firstly, it's quite clear, that a lot has been pinned on him and Gant. And maybe I'm throwing a theory out there from the perspective of the police force. It's kind of like, okay, well, we got the guys, job done, case closed, right? But there's a lot of things within this case that are pretty concerning and kind of make the law enforcement involved look really bad. And this is one of the things I wanted to go back to. For example, the prison break. So, we touched on it a little bit earlier, but they were able to jimmy the locks and get through the doors. They crawled through the ventilation system and tunneled their way through a dirt floor in the basement, leaving wadded up sheets and newspapers in their bunks. My question to you just on this is, why do you think the security was so terrible at this jail? I realize it's not prison, so it's different. I know there's a big difference, but why was it so easy for them to get out? This isn't Shawshank Redemption. It's not like the 50s. This is in the early 2000s. What, did they not have any resources? Like, what gives? How was it so easy?
Okay, let me just say first off, this is the second time Bob broke out of jail. He broke out of another jail in the 80s. So when he broke out in the 80s, he jimmied the locks, and he someone had brought in a little saw blade for him, and he this really happened. I swear to God, it did. And he sawed his way out, and he managed to get out. So he jimmied the locks in that one. When he was in the Grayson County Jail, what they did was they climbed through the air duct system, through the vents, up through the ceiling, and they went that route, and that's how they dug a tunnel that way. I have to say, I interviewed the individuals in Grayson County. I interviewed Sheriff Gary. I interviewed all the DA. I interviewed everyone, some of them on the SWAT team. And I want to say they were amazing with me.
Okay.
I could just cry thinking about them. They weren't prepared for something like this. It's a small town. I mean, they're not thinking that somebody's gonna escape their jail. I mean, this is a smaller community. They're thinking, we've got them, we've got these guys. Let's, you've got to hold them, let them go through the process. Nobody thought that this would happen. It never crossed their mind. If it had, then they would have had better security. But there's always a first time that something happens that causes that's a reason for something to take place. And what I mean by that is, if that hadn't happened, who knows? They may still be operating the same way. And they didn't know that. And I felt, I just don't think they were prepared. All of them were very professional with me. In Grayson County, they were absolutely amazing with me. I think they did the best that they could. I'm proud of them. My hat goes off to them. They heard about the escape, and I want you to know those officers, those deputies, everybody, the rangers, troopers, everybody you can imagine, they were working around the clock to bring them in, and they did. And I don't think they were prepared for that. I know they weren't. Nobody expected that, come on. But because of Bob and all of them, they do have security. They have everything in place that is needed. So that won't happen again.
No, it makes sense. I think, obviously I have to ask just to kind of paint a picture of what the scenario is, and bringing it back to what I was asking you before. that kind of changes the scenario of the or the situation as far as like the people that are still free. I mean, maybe it's less a case of, you know, police maybe not doing enough. Maybe it's a case of more like not having the resources to, you know, pursue these people. Because I suppose, yeah, I mean, if you don't have the resources, you don't have the means, like, what can you do? Do you know what I mean?
Well, these individuals who are out walking around have paid a lot of money to stay out.
Ah,
Yeah.
okay.
So there wasn't a serious investigation done on them. There just was not. It's people in high places who have managed to get away with their crimes, and they still are doing it today. They've been in Bob's life since the 80s. And I want to explain this. So Bob got caught up in the 80s with a DPS state trooper. The trooper approached him and said, would you like to get into cattle wrestling? I want you to do this. Because he'd heard the history of Bob. He'd heard that Bob was wonderful working around ranches. He knew what he was doing, and he wanted the best. And so that's what he did. He got Bob under his wing. Bob was about 19 at the time. So he got involved with that trooper. The trooper ended up losing his license, but that's about it. He was charged with tampering with a witness, which is a felony. But the judge adjudicated the crime and sentenced him. He received the sentencing of a misdemeanor instead of a felony. And he spent minimal days in the jail. He's still out and about today. He's not in Bob's life. The people that paid Bob's bonds in Comanche County are the ones who have been in his life ever since. And they're the ones who got Bob involved more with more crimes. Money laundering, just many different things, many different crimes. So when they paid the bonds for Bob, and then they had him running drugs, they had him doing all kinds of things. The individuals that got in trouble alongside with Bob, they paid their way and they got out. They should have ended up going to prison. The fella that was involved in Bob's first escape from jail in Callahan County, he was the one who had brought in a saw blade for Bob. He should have gone to prison, but he didn't. His charges were dropped, and there was proof that he was involved. And I have proof of all this stuff. See, they thought that they had gotten rid of all this paperwork, but I found it. Leave it to a family member to find what's needed. Try to help them, right? I'm not trying to free Bob. I'm just trying to get some serious eyes on all of this to look and say, hey, we need to take this serious and consider what's going on here.
No, I agree. I mean, like, it's not fair that it's all pinned on like one or two people. Like, and especially since they're still out and about and committing these crimes. And it's kind of fascinating to me because, you know, like, just on a side note, I've been watching a lot of like classic gangster movies lately. Just, I love classic cinema, right? But the thing that always kind of strikes me is that these crimes and stuff, and like, they take place in a time where you could kind of get away with certain things. You could do that. It was a lot, I won't say easier, but like, you know, people were more influenceable. That, you know, there was ways of covering your tracks, etc. Right? But times are different now. You know, things like forensics are different now, but the thing that is the same is that people are people. And if there's a will, there's a way. Like, do you know what I mean? We see it over and over again, like people that absolutely should be in jail, high profile people, celebrities, and somehow they're not, they're free. They're able to get by the system. And it's like, I guess it's the classic friends in high places situation, isn't it? Sorry to say for Bob, but like, I guess he just didn't have the right friends or the right resources, and then it just got pinned on him. And then that's, what can you do really in that scenario? I mean, not to say he shouldn't be in prison for the crimes, but at the same time, it's like when you speak about justice, obviously you want everyone to be accountable for that, not just one person taking the blame for everyone. You know, that does seem unfair. Like this, I just want to talk more about this DPS trooper, for example. Do you know of like the motivations of this trooper and why he decided to court Bob into this? Because, you know, he's a young man and he's being coerced into this behavior. Is there any? Do you know the reasoning behind that?
Well, I tracked him back to a theft ring from the 70s, the DPS state trooper, and other law officials tied in Comanche County. So the trooper was crooked from the start.
Right.
And
Okay.
he found a chance to, so he had been stealing farming equipment from
Okay.
individuals in the area. And so he had heard because he had met Bob through Bob's father, Marvin. And Marvin was the one who introduced Bob to the trooper.
Oh no.
Yeah. And so the trooper caught wind that, hey, you can make some money with this cattle rustling. And so
Ah, I
that's
see.
what, yeah. So he was just looking for another way to make a quick buck. And he was the trooper was just very crooked. He was very crooked from the minute, I mean, from the word go, you know. Um, the theft ring that I had written about, there was all kinds of information. These individuals in law enforcement would load up. They'd have a few guys who had records, and they kind of pinned it on them is what they did. They loaded up the farming equipment, they hauled it off, and they ended up taking it as far to another country into Mexico and selling it. So it was never found
It's always
again. Now some
Mexico,
of
isn't
it,
it? It's always
always,
Mexico. It's just
always
as soon as you
Mexico.
get south of the
Yeah.
border, it's like the rules just change completely.
You get your money, get your tequila, and get out of there. Yeah. So it just so the trooper was just looking for another way to make a quick buck, and he found it with Bob.
Well, here's a question for you. What if? Do you think Bob ever stood a chance of living a crime-free life, like, or was it inevitable for him? Like, let's say he didn't meet this state trooper, or he decided against working with him. Like, is there any other life for Bob, or was this just inevitable?
I tell you the time that I think Bob could have stepped away from the criminal life, and I don't know if it would have been completely. I think he would have been involved in crimes, but I don't think it would have been to this extent.
Mm-hmm.
When he ended up in prison after uh, violating his probation from Comanche County, and he ended up in there. The individuals that paid his bonds from Comanche County, they knew his ex-wife, and he met her, and she pulled him back in to this lifestyle. I have letters where Bob had written to family members saying he wanted to get out of this lifestyle. He wanted to do something different. Now, I don't know if he would have, if he wouldn't have been around her and all the rest of them, he would have had a chance. And that's the one opportunity that I strongly believe, and so does the rest of our family. If he was not going to do it anymore, that would have been the chance. But she got him out. She got him back involved. And we'll never know.
Do you think it's fair to say maybe he was, I know how this sounds, but like easily influenceable? Was it a love thing? He was just hopelessly in love with her and just went along with it? Or was there other motivations for him?
I believe he fell in love with her. Yeah. Yeah, he did. He was very easily swayed. He was in a prison. He hadn't talked to he'd gone through a divorce. He was married.
Right.
And this woman out of the blue just writes him. I mean, he's shown her picture by another inmate. And this gal sent her picture in and hooked him. And once it got to that point, he couldn't get away or didn't want to get away. I don't know. But the thing is, Bob had committed crimes at such an early age. And so it's kind of like if he's not going to get in that lifestyle, he can't be anywhere around it. And it was all around him. So I don't think he stood a chance of getting away, even if we blame her. We don't like her or them because of what they've done.
No, but I think this is an important argument to make in the frame of this, because like while we are all accountable for our own individual actions, not everyone is a strong-willed,
Right.
I will do this, I won't do that. Like some of us are just not like that. And the way this kind of sounds is like, okay, this is a man who he kind of bounced from crime to crime, never really knowing which way, not to say he wasn't completely, wasn't ever steering his own ship, so to speak, but like it does sound like, things get presented to him. He thinks, why not? Maybe I don't have anything else going on now. Here's a way to make money, like, keeping it simple, right? And in this scenario, it kind of does sound like this woman just used him, like just picked out a guy like, oh, he'll be useful for this stuff I want to run, used him, and then got rid of him when she needed to, and she continues to do her thing, and he's in prison. And I can't help but like the cynic in me kind of looks at that like it's planned, like it's.
It was planned, and I haven't shared this with anyone else except for family. But
Okay.
so I had worked with other private investigators in the past. I was not licensed, but I did it at my own discretion. And because of that experience, it gave me the knowledge of how to know how to dig and where to go and find this information. I happened to find when I was learning about her, she had been involved with other individuals who were incarcerated and had married one of them. And
Interesting.
they ended up back in prison. She got away from them. So, yeah, we think it was planned. We think she was sent by the individuals that paid Bob's bonds in Comanche County. Yeah, I think she was just a pawn in a game, and she allowed herself to be. But Bob, but make no mistake about it. Yeah, he was easily influenced, but he committed those crimes. And by golly, I'm not trying to talk him. I'm not trying to make him look good or
Mm-hmm.
in any way. He had an opportunity to get away, but many have said he could not get away from these people. They were so dangerous. They were so dangerous. So I don't think it mattered what he would have done. I don't think he really would have been able to live a crime-free life. And at this point, I don't think he wants to because that's all he knows.
Well,
You
that's
know?
another factor, isn't it? Yeah, it's like
Mhm.
if that's all you've known, you've been surrounded by that, then that's probably the only life you're ever going to realistically lead. I mean, if Bob was out now, for example, let's say he got parole, what's he going to do? I mean, it's very well known that like convicts find it very hard to. It's not impossible, but
Right.
if it's a sorry to put it so crudely, but if it's a difference between I don't know working, let's say like a cleaning job or like a really like simple task like at a restaurant, something like that, versus hey, here's an opportunity to make a score, set you up for a while. Da, 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 da. It's you good. You're probably gonna go for that. You're gonna go for what you know, what you're good at, the chance to make more money. You know.
I agree. Yes. So Bob is one of the best con men that I think anyone's ever come in contact with. I can read through his cons. I'm blown away when he talks, and I'm like, how come other people don't see this? What
What do you,
you're well, I don't visit him anymore at the prison. I had my name taken off of his list, and the reason I did is because there was an individual who I wanted him to remove, and he would not. And this individual was tied in with the people involved in the crimes with him from the 80s. And I didn't want to put myself or our family, anyone in jeopardy. So I had to take my name off the list. But when I would go visit Bob before, I could read his cons. He was still trying to con people
in
because he
prison?
was, but outside of
Oh,
prison. Yeah.
okay.
He was so angry. You have to understand this. I can't stress it enough. He's so angry at what these people have done to him, meaning his ex-wife,
Like how they
everything that
used him.
yes, yes. And that's why I believe that's why he's still doing what he's doing.
So he's kind of like
He's so
driven by
angry.
revenge at this point.
Yeah.
Would be fair to say.
Yeah, he is. And I understand. I get it.
Mm.
You know, and as his family, that's why I took this on, and other family members. We just want justice because he's done a lot and he's in there, but he deserves to heal. And that's what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to help him heal by bringing all of this out. I just want a serious investigation. I want these people looked at so my family member can go on and try to heal. Leave him alone.
You mentioned
That's
there
all I know.
that you can see his cons, you can understand like how his mind works. I'm interested. Like, what do you think makes him a good con man? Like, what exactly is different with what he does versus other people? Let's say.
He's so he's so charming in the way he speaks to people. He can make a bad story sound wonderful.
Mm.
He is, as I said, he's a compulsive liar. So he knows how to really pour the butter on. And if he hears this, he's going to get mad, but I don't really care. He really knows, he really knows how to get his side across and convince people. He's just very charismatic. Um, he appears to be sympathetic towards people. You know, if someone's having a bad day, he wants to know all about it. And then he wants to, he's just very charismatic. I could, there are times I could just slap him. I'm like, stop it. You need to quit doing this to people because
Would he
we had
try it
you.
on you? Or did he ever
He would
try it?
try. No, he knows better than to try it on any of us on family. He knows better than that.
But did he ever
But
try it on you and you kind of realized in the mid like, oh, he's doing this?
he
And you,
pulled it once on me, and I put a stop to it.
how
He
did
put a
that
stop.
how did that happen?
Well, I embarrassed him. I
Okay.
called him out in front of everybody, the guards, and embarrassed him. I humiliated him. He knows better.
But what
He
stood
knows.
out for you? How did you sort of guess that? Like, what did you pick out that was like that? This is a con. He's
It wasn't
trying.
really. It wasn't really a con. Let
Okay.
me just share the story with you. We were talking. This is really silly. Um, we were talking. We were at a visit. We had another family member with us, and he said we were talking about music, and he said we listen to opera in here, and I said no, you don't listen to. They don't play opera in prison. And he got mad, and we got into an argument. And the more he talked, the more he lied, and the more I could tell. And I just blew it. And I know that's not a con, but that's just I can read him. I can read him. And there's another individual, Mr. Davis, he's in the book. He knows how to read Bob's cons and lies because cons are lies. And that's what, he's able to so easily pull that with people because it's all he knows. There was a time where he had said, I need money for this for my commissary. I
Mm.
said, no, you don't. I'll put money in your commissary, but you don't need it for that. And I called him on it. And I just, he knows it. But I do want to say this. Like I said, he's a compulsive liar and he does it without even realizing it. It just
That's
comes so
scary.
easy to him. Yeah, it just comes so easy to him. So he'll say something and then he may not remember it later.
They say a lot with compulsive liars that like they lie so much that they have trouble distinguishing the truth from their own lies. Do you think that's true with Bob? Do you think he's kind of like living in a world of a delusion?
I do. Yeah. Because he's done it for so long. Like I said, every chance that he has to con, he does. And I think his motivation behind it is for revenge. I really do.
You
I
mentioned
mean, I
earlier. Oh, so go on.
no, that's okay. I know that. I know that because I know how angry he is. It's not right, but it is what it is, you know?
Well, everyone's motivated by something, aren't they? That's the thing.
Mhm.
You mentioned before that you'd worked with private investigators. So I kind of wanted to ask you, what would you say were the biggest lessons you learned from working alongside them?
They were just wonderful. I learned that when you are trying to get information, you have to be open minded. You have no idea what you're going to uncover. You got to be
Ooh,
prepared for anything and everything, you know? Um, you have to handle everything with care, with ease, because you don't know how people are going to respond to you. Just because someone wants help and they want the facts, you have to be careful in how you present that information to them because information that you can find for people that is hurtful, it can ruin their lives, it can devastate them. You have
right.
to just be careful when you're uncovering other people and their dirty deeds. I mean, it's simple as that. It can destroy people's lives. I have learned how to look for information that people need to know, maybe to help uncover crimes or just whatever it is. And I love that. I've always had an interest in wanting to be a bounty hunter
Oh yeah.
because of working with the PIs. Yeah, but of course I didn't because, I have family and I don't want to. I don't want to do something that that would probably be perfect for someone who didn't have a family that they were concerned about or whatever. But it's the adrenaline, it's the excitement of it all. You know,
I get you. I get you. During the course of working with these private investigators, what would you say were the most surprising or shocking parts of working with them? Was there anything that just kind of caught you by surprise, maybe?
I think there was one time when I was working with a private investigator, and we were on a case. And like I said, I wasn't licensed; I just kind of shadowed and followed. And they went to extremes to get those answers. My my thought is sometimes, and everybody's different, sometimes if you step away from something and come back, you can get the answers then.
Mm,
You don't always have to go full force ahead. You're always going to have another opportunity for something else. It may not be the same, but that's something I learned is that some individuals believe in going full force, no matter the condition, and get the answers, and some don't. And I'm more on the safer side where if there's something going on and I want answers, I'll come back to it, but I don't want to put myself in any kind of jeopardy.
yeah, of course.
That was the one eye-opening experience for me that it did shake me a little bit. I think it's part of why I didn't want to get my license because, you know, you don't know what, you know,
No, I
I
get
don't
it.
want to be easy to find if I'm trying to get information. You know what I mean? I don't want people to track me. Does that make sense? I know that
No,
might sound
I
kind
get.
of shady, but
No,
hey,
I totally get it. I was watching this movie Chinatown recently, classic movie from the 70s. So for those who don't know, it's a private investigator. He's gets sort of caught up in a particular crime, and it's outside of what he normally does, and it just ends up in catastrophe. And it constantly, other thing that I noticed, speaking to your concerns about it, the safety element, is he's constantly finding himself in dangerous situations, being threatened, everything. And it goes back to what you were saying before about, you're uncovering people's dirty deeds, their secrets, whatever. People are going to protect that. They're going to protect what's close to them or try and protect their reputation or whatever the case may be. So if you're working as a private investigator or bounty hunter or whatever else, you got to expect that you're probably going to be involved in danger. And as you mentioned before, like having a family, stuff like that, that changes maybe whether or not you go towards that particular life path. I would imagine a lot of people that get in that line of work maybe either don't have a family or they put significant efforts in place to try and protect that fiercely. But you're never really safe in that line of work.
you're really not. And I had some family members, they wanted to hear, oh my gosh, this is exciting. Tell me about it.
Right.
And then there were others who said,
Mm.
mm-mm, get out of it. And there's a reason why people hide certain things. It's because they don't want everybody knowing things about them, details.
No, I
And
totally
it
get
is,
that.
it's dangerous. Yeah, it's
Was it they say knowledge is power? You know, it can be easily used against you. I mean, it's like I live a public life in the sense of like what I share online and stuff and what I do, but there's a lot I keep very close to my chest, and no one will ever know because it's you should definitely do that. That's why they call it a private life, people.
that's right.
You know what I mean? Like have a private life. Don't tell everyone. Like just this is a complete tangent right now, but the amount of people online I've seen who were very forthcoming and candid with their lives online, and then it backfired. It was used against them. It's like knowing too much about a person, or what is it they call it, airing your dirty laundry. It can be used
Right.
against you, and it will be used against you. And the same is true of like, be careful who you trust, guys, because whoever you love, whoever you care about, you know, friends, whatever, that can become an enemy of yours. Things will can and will be used against you. So be careful who you trust and what you say.
Not only that, I remember, I don't know if people still do this, but I know when Facebook first came out or any of
Mm.
the social media, people would post. I had friends who did this. I'm going to the grocery store. I'm going here. I'm going there.
Oh
And I
my
think, yeah,
God.
what are you doing? I
People
can't
still
do
do that.
that.
There's people that still do
They
that. The
still
check-in
do.
thing. Yeah. It's like, I mean, you'll be
Oh my
like,
gosh.
especially in the States, like you're just inviting people to
Yeah.
come attack you. Like, why on
Right.
earth would you tell? Like, I'm careful with that. Like when it comes to
Yeah.
like taking photos. So for instance, I never
Hmm.
take photos of where I live. I never
Hmm.
take photos. Like I know that sounds obvious, but like even places close to it. Because it's,
Hmm.
you know,
Hmm.
you can do things like now, you can do image search and find exactly where the coordinates where someone lives. Like people do it through things
Right.
like geocaching and stuff online, where they're able to like isolate an image and roughly figure out where something is, and it's like that's terrifying. So
I know
if
it
you,
is.
you know what
I
I mean, like
know.
if you're posting pictures like saying like this is where I'm at, it's like
Hmm.
you might as well
Hmm.
just like be like, yeah, come attack me. It's like an invitation almost. I just
I
blows my
agree.
mind.
I agree. Yeah, and I'm just blown away that people still do it. I mean, they're still doing that because with all the
Well,
48 hours and all this stuff with all these episodes and
it's the
it's
ignorance thing. It's like I had a friend,
yeah.
an acting friend who recently moved to where I live, and I noticed in her videos like she was posting roughly of where she lived, like views and stuff like that. And I just messaged her. I was like, listen, be careful. Like you will get people stalk you, you'll get trouble. And she was like, oh no, I'm being careful. And I'm like, well, I was like, I can see, for instance, the exterior of this building. I could figure out roughly where that is.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
I think she took it on board, but like, like stop
I know.
showing people that. Like, come on, guys. Oh my god. Let's bring it back to the crime. I still got many questions to ask you, but there's a few things I want to kind of iron out with regards to the prosecution of Leach and Gant, and also just some miscellaneous stuff related to it. So, one thing I find really interesting is the decision for all five men of the Grayson County Five to go their separate ways, with the
Mhm.
exception of Gant and Lynch. Why did Gant and Leach choose to stick together, and why did the others go their separate ways?
Well, honestly, when they ended up at a ranch and let's see, two of them were tired. They were done and they were ready for it to be over with. So they stayed behind and I think they were ready to just surrender. They were like, hey, it's over with. So the third one ended up taking off and he ended up going where he had family in a several counties over. And I think he was eventually ready to give up. So I think it just kind of they were just tired. There was no direction, nobody leading them. They didn't know what to do. Bob
Well,
had tried
okay,
to get away from Gant. Uh-huh.
let's pull that back for 1 second. So,
Okay.
as I understand, like Gant was the leader of this crew, but then as you just said, that kind of contradicts it. There was no leadership in that moment. So, like, what happens? Like, did Leach kind of, okay, I've got an escape plan, guys, follow me, da 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 da. They do it, and then now he's just not got any idea of where they should go next.
Gant was not the leader.
No, no.
Leach
So,
was a leader.
sorry,
Bob
that's
was a
what
leader.
my
Yeah, no,
mistake.
that's
Yeah.
okay. So, like I said, Bob's whole purpose of breaking out of jail was because he wanted to get revenge on these people. and none of them were home. They went to several houses, and
Oh,
conveniently at 2 in the morning, all of these people were not home. They went to several houses.
that's
They
weird.
knew that Bob was going to escape the jail. They were very fully aware of it.
Were they
Yes,
tipped off?
they were involved in it. They knew Bob was going to escape. Uh,
How did they know he was going to escape?
Bob's ex wife had a niece who went to visit Bob in the jail, and she helped break him out. She was
Oh,
telling him everything that was going on. Yeah,
interesting.
yeah. So what happened was they were going to all these places and no one was home. And so what Bob was, I guess, in his mind, what he was wanting to do couldn't be done because he couldn't get revenge on these people. They wouldn't answer the door or they just weren't home. So they went off, and then he was, like I said, he was with all of these other inmates, and that's when they tore off. They needed money, they needed this, they needed that. So that's when they started terrorizing everyone. They went to people's homes that they didn't know. So when they went to this ranch and they took a woman hostage, um, Bob and Gant ended up going together. Now, I don't know the reasoning behind it, but I know at one point, and even the woman that they had kidnapped from that ranch, it was her ranch, she had even stated in some of the statements that Bob was trying to get away from Gant because Gant was just the longer this drew out, the more violent Gant was getting, and Bob wanted to get away from him. I guess he just didn't know how. So they stayed together. There wasn't any way to get away from him, I guess. I don't know. I
One
don't
thing
know the
that's
reason.
one thing that's interesting in the police reports is that there's a feeling amongst the detectives that Leach was obviously originally the leader, but then at some point he like lost his leadership to Gan. Can you speak to that? Did that happen at any point?
It did, yes. So somehow at the shootout, and it may have even been before the shootout, when they had kidnapped the other, there were several people that were kidnapped. In fact, they had run into some hunters. They were young men,
Interesting.
and yeah, and they were trying to switch out vehicles. Is what they were trying to do. So Bob put up the hood of his truck because he was trying to get them to stop, and they did. And they ended up taking their truck. They switched vehicles on them, is what they did. But to keep the hunters from going anywhere, Bob had carried them and hog-tied them and put them in the back of the truck, in the back of the truck that they had swapped out with them. And then it seems like after that, when they went to the next home, according to the witness, the woman that they had kidnapped from the ranch, the first witness, the first person, somewhere there is when Bob kind of lost control. It's when Gant seemed to kind of take over. And I don't know. So yes, you are right in saying that Bob lost, I guess, the leadership role, maybe.
Yeah,
That's what they
I
want
mean,
to
again,
call
it's
him.
it's just what
Yeah.
the detectives said, but I found it
Yeah.
interesting when I was going through all this research and looking at different pointers, and there's more stuff I found throughout the research that's like just poses questions from a like psychological perspective. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You're like, well, why would they choose to do this? Why would they do this? Why would they do this? And speaking of which, whilst Gant and Leach were apprehended in 2001, their individual trials took several years before final convictions were made. Why do you think this process was so slow, despite the overwhelming nature of their crimes and the severity of them, and like how much evidence they had on them and everything?
Well, the DA in Bonham, Texas, he had just come into that position where he
Uh,
was at, and they had had Gant's trial pretty quick. Bob's, they waited a while, and it wasn't intentional. It was just an older case. They had to close them out. They'd had so many different cases that they were trying to get to. The previous DA that was there had left because I guess they'd been there for so long. So a new DA had stepped in, and he wanted to close up the old cases, and so that's why they did that. Um, I just think there was just a backlog of so many cases and trials going on. I don't think it was intentional. I really don't. I think it just, sometimes when you get into the legal system and things sometimes they just take a long time.
That's the
And
vibe I get. I mean, you're
yeah,
talking about the DA situation as well. That was something that I read. Like it was basically passed from one person to another, and it's just like,
yeah.
oh, I hate when things just become about admin and stuff. It's like, oh, we got to do that case. Okay, let's get that in. Like what? Like surely it's the shut and close situation, but um, but and that's interesting actually. I know you say it was just kind of like how it happened, but it must have been that out of the two of them, like Gant was considered like more of an immediate threat then, I guess. Like perhaps.
They were all on the same page.
Hmm.
I don't think one was any worse than the other. I think it depends on who you ask.
Right.
Now, the law enforcement is fully aware that Bob helped and worked with them at the end to get
That probably
Vincent
helped.
and Irma out, right? But we have to remember, Bob was also the one that convinced all these inmates to break him out of the Grayson County Jail.
Hmm.
And if it hadn't been for his actions there, they wouldn't have ended up in a shootout. So they weren't dealing with someone who was walking a straight and narrow. They found someone who was willing to work with them and pull an end to this, and they had to take that. Now, I do want to say this. Irma, the wife who was held hostage, in my book, law enforcement saved them all, but she was the heroine. See, she had worked in jails before, and so she knew how to talk to inmates. And she knew how to talk about, she couldn't get Gant's attention. Nobody could because Gant was so violent. He was so mean. But she got the attention of Bob. And I believe she was a huge part in all of that coming to an end because she was able to talk to him and get him to open up. And I think that's part of why Bob started working with law enforcement and decided to bring it to an end.
During pre-trial discovery in 2006, neither Gant or Leach wanted to face a Fannin County jury. Why do you think this is?
I think because the crimes were so violent in Fannin County and Bonham, they didn't want to go through. Bob didn't.
Because he just knew
I
it'd
know
be
he did.
like shut and close, like
He
done.
knew what he had done, and he didn't want to go through that.
Was
He
it
didn't.
also maybe like he didn't want to face maybe some of the because you mentioned it like it's a small county, so like he probably would have known a lot of people in the jury. That would that be fair to say?
If I'd have been on the jury, I'd have hung him. So I bet 100% of those people in there certainly would have, knowing what he did, the crimes that he committed. Yeah, he didn't want to go through that humiliation. He didn't want to go through that. And I say that strongly. You know,
Wow.
I'm his family, and I'm going to be very upfront with you. And he knows that. Um, he didn't have any business doing what he did to those victims. He or Gant
Is
didn't
the
have any business doing that.
is the death penalty still legal in that state?
It is. He wouldn't have got the death penalty, though.
Why do you think that is?
Well, those charges wouldn't have stemmed from the death penalty.
Okay.
But he just, the crimes were just so heinous. It just,
So Gant has several life sentences which have stacked up to as much as 91 years. I always, just on a side note, I always find this kind of, it's not funny, but at the same time, it kind of is because it's like they stack on top of them and then people end up having, for like serious, serious crimes, they end up having like, oh, you have a 125-year sentence. And they actually bother to give them like, oh, you'll be out on this day. And it's like, yeah, okay, they're not going to live that long, like unless there's like a freak of science that occurs. This is not going to happen. But one thing I found that was interesting about this is despite the fact that he's got up to 90 years stacked against him, apparently he's eligible to be considered for parole in 2031. What are your thoughts on this? I couldn't believe this. This has got to be, I mean, maybe it's kind of one of those things where, okay, yeah, he's eligible, but there's no way he'll ever get it. But I mean, there's a chance. And why is he even being considered for this?
I don't know, but I'm going to be one of the individuals writing letters to the parole board telling them to leave him in there. I'm
Mm.
going to be part of one of those that, because of what he did to the foresters and all the other victims, I'm going to be one of those saying, do not let him out. Um, Bob was a habitual criminal. And so he has 14 life sentences and they're stacked. And so he's never going to get out. He doesn't have a chance really of getting out. Gant was also a criminal. He had started when he was a teenager. He lived in some type of children's home for kids when they get in trouble. They're close to Sherman. So he was a repeat offender. So I think with the crimes that were committed and then him being a repeat offender, I think that's why the sentences are so long. And they should be, you know.
Is Leach eligible for parole?
I believe in 2034, 2035, but I don't believe he won't.
I just find it
You know.
interesting because like their individual sentences are different and the way they're treated are slightly different. I mean, it's comforting to at least hear that okay, like they're
Mhm.
both eligible, but they won't get it. But it's interesting. I mean, like for example, Bob received the same sentence as Gant, but for security reasons, his plea was conducted from the Fannin County Jail. And apparently those concerns come from the FBI, which is kind of crazy to think about. I imagine it's because of what you were saying before about how there might be concerns if he was in front of that jury. Obviously, he had said that he didn't want to be in front of that jury, but
Well,
what would
the reason they moved the trial into the jail is in Bonham is because they were afraid that Bob was going to escape because remember he had done it twice before, and they were afraid that there was going to be somebody who was going to break him out while he was traveling from the prison in the bus to to where the trial was going to be held. The DA in Bonham had told me that there was an airplane, there was a helicopter that flew overhead over the bus that Bob was in to make sure that he wouldn't escape. They had put a uh, they put I don't know, they put something over his head so he couldn't see, so he was blindfolded, or maybe they put something he couldn't see where he was going, what he was doing. They were afraid he was going to break out. They had snipers on top of the rooftops there at the courthouse
wow.
where they had the trial. Yeah, the DA went into great detail with me. He said they had that. They shut the town down, downtown on the square, because the crimes were so heinous. They were afraid he would break out. They were afraid he would get loose. And
Do
he
you
went
think
in.
do you think it's because
Mhm.
of the kind of organized nature of these gentlemen? So like they very much anticipated that it probably would happen if there was even a slight window or a slight chance.
They weren't worried about Gant escaping. I mean, or maybe they were, I don't know, but they were more worried about Bob because of his history with the jails, not the prisons, with the jails. And so they didn't know. They didn't want to risk him getting out. Um, but I will say this, when he went into the jail in Bonham for the trial, and it was just a few people in there, and the DA had told me, Bob was, he could tell he was ready for it to be over with. When he didn't want to fight, he didn't have any more. He was tired. He was exhausted. If that makes sense.
Mm.
He wasn't in there in his mind thinking, I'm going to get out of here. He wasn't thinking that. I think he had just kind of given up. I think he'd given up. And I think when I reached out to him and I said, okay, here's what I want to do. I want to write the story. I think it gave him a little hope. And I think we all need hope. I believe that. Um,
I understand that. So the as I said, as we said earlier, the motivation now, the goal now is just find the rest of the assailants really and make sure they get convicted. Hopefully. Um, I wanted to ask, like, how has your book kind of helped with the investigation of the crime, and how have things progressed since its release?
well, Nobody's done anything. I keep looking into things, but nothing has happened so far. I don't know if it will.
You never know. You never know. I mean, it helps to be for things like this, coverage of things, get people talking. That's often what gets the ball rolling, isn't it? Because then more people start paying attention to it, and that's something that kind of blew my mind. Actually, I'm hearing this story, and I'm like, in my head, I'm like, this is a movie right here. And sorry to like trivialize it in such a way, but like the reality is, the best stories are always true stories. That's just how it is, and it fascinates me, this whole story, like just the psychology behind it, the organization, how many elements there are to this. I mean, you could talk about this all day. There's so much to unpack from it, and it kind of blows my mind that more people don't know about it, but I think that probably will change, to be honest,
Well,
as time
thank
goes
you.
on.
I hope it does. I hope you're right. The thing is, I've had people say, how do you feel? I mean, because a lot of people sensationalize on outlaws. They think,
Yeah.
oh, hey, and I want to make sure we understand that nobody is trying to sensationalize on Bob Harold.
Hmm.
What we're trying to do is tell the story, but I don't want us to forget those victims. Those victims are amazing people and they've been through so much, and their stories are just, you would not believe how, what they've been through. And I think that's important for people to know that. You have to understand that people have been hurt, and they deserve that peace. They deserve their story to be told, but in a respectful way, in a respectful manner. My index is 23 pages long. I'm most proud of that out of the whole book because that's nothing but proof. That's all it is. It's proof of what I say. And those victims are part of that. Those people that have been victimized. I don't like calling them victims because they moved on.
Hmm.
They hadn't let it define them. It was something that happened, and they're amazing people. They would make a great story, but if anyone wants to make it a story, I want it understood. Those people who were victimized, their story needs to be seriously heard.
Yeah, I read into this. All I can say, I'm not going to mention it here, but to anyone that's listening to the show, I would urge you to read into the case files, read into the story, but do so with caution. There's a lot of distressing, upsetting stuff. Obviously, we've spoken a lot about the heinous nature of the crimes. Um, that's all I'm willing to say right now. I think it's just prepare yourself. It's a lot. Um, and as much as like I am kind of like fascinated by this and I was excited about this and stuff, I didn't get any enjoyment obviously out of reading that. It sounded horrific. It was obviously very concerning, and I do feel for the victims of the crime. And I feel like, yeah, if this is ever picked up as a story, that will need to be handled with a lot of care and respect, because the reality is there were a lot of victims in this crime. It wasn't just like a group of guys going out and just kind of all hell breaks loose and it's a laugh. Like absolutely not. Some people's lives were affected like forever because of these crimes. So that's definitely something to be um, kept, I think, in mind when approaching this story. And also, one thing I wanted to kind of ask you about is there's a couple of angles I want to discuss with you. So I'd like to kind of know more about how this has affected your life, how being related to Bob has affected your life. We spoke a little bit off camera about this, but I just wanted to kind of explore that a little bit, because obviously earlier we spoke about the importance of protecting one's self, identity, being safe. Naturally, you exposing certain things, putting this story out there, that puts you at risk. So I want to kind of know, how has this affected your life?
To be honest with you, this has affected my life in a lot of positive ways.
That's good.
I've met a lot of amazing people. Um, I have made lifetime friendships with people that I probably never would have before. I know I wouldn't have before. Yeah. Um, It has been it has been a very good positive thing for me. I have decided to write another book, not about Bob. Maybe if we can get a serious investigation, I may later, but right now I'm not. Um, I, there have been a few bumps in the road, but my family has been my biggest support system. My friends and family, they've encouraged me along the way. So I have learned to be more, I was before, but more aware now. And if something doesn't seem right, if it's a little off, probably is. I wouldn't change this if, if somebody would have said, if you could have done something else, would you? No, because I feel very strong about this story. I feel very passionate about it. I did something nobody else has done about this, and I feel like it will eventually be seen, maybe someday. I don't know, but I've at least told Bob's story, and to me that was important. I told Bob and our family's story, and it deserved to be told. Nothing but good positive things from this. Yeah.
Speaking of which, you've had to rewrite this story at least 3 times because the people involved in the crime hacked into your computer. You dealt with a lot of different issues in just getting this book done and created. What can you tell us about that?
Well, I have had an editor who's been with me from the very beginning, John. He is amazing. He's a dear friend. And every time I had to rewrite it, he and other family members would say, okay, let me check and see if you sent me anything because there's got to be something on record here. He didn't have any current stuff. Um, every time I wrote it, it was better than the one before. So maybe, I mean, it worked out. I think the one thing that scared me the most, rewriting it angered me at times because I think, gosh, I don't want to do it anymore. But it was the loosening of the lug nuts of our tires. Mine and family members' tires have been loosened. And I thought, this is it. That's what kept me going. I thought, you're doing it for a reason. And so am I. So there were times when when I was going through that process, I think, this isn't going to get out there. And I kept going, and it did. And the day that it finally did, I reached out to my assistant, Laura. My God, the lady's amazing. And we sent it to print. And I told her, I said, I'm done. And we were working around the clock to get it out there. We were trying to beat somebody else who had tried to steal the story. And that individual who tried to steal it is tied in with the individuals I exposed. And it didn't matter. It didn't matter what they were doing because what I had done was coming out. All my hard work was being seen by people. It seemed like at the time it was it was awful and I didn't think I could go on. But once it was out there, I realized I did a really good job and I'm proud of myself. I think I can do another one.
Yeah, talk us through that. What can we expect with this? Is it a follow up to this story? Is it something completely different? Tell us about that.
It's something completely different. I don't want to write about Bob
Mm-hmm.
again unless there's anything that has changed, any serious investigations, any updates, because I'm not going to write about the same thing.
Yeah.
Um, there are a few things that I'm looking into. They're true crime. One of them is true crime, and it's exciting. It's local, close to home. It happened many, many, many years ago, back in the 50s. So it's a case that's been solved, but it's interesting. And like I said, it's kind of a local story. And if I can get the records, that's a big thing. If I can get the records from the courts and everything, I'll write it. If I can't, then I'll have to move on. But that's my next one.
I wish you the best of luck with that. I hope it continues, man. Sounds like you're onto something here with this kind of like detective kind of like I mean I must say like I do love true crime as a genre, a concept. I think it's fascinating for many of the reasons that we discussed in this show, like the psychology behind things, why people choose to, because it's people at the end of the day. You're studying people and why people do things and where is their head at in a given time frame, and a lot of the time, sometimes it can be simple, sometimes it can be really complex. It's amazing. It really is. So I wish you the best of luck with that.
Thank you.
And as we draw things to a close for today, I have a few questions completely unrelated to our topics today, but I ask every guest this, and I'd love to ask you, what's the best advice you've ever received?
Oh, the best advice I've ever received. I've received a lot of advice. There's been a lot of people around me. One of them is to keep going, keep writing, because you have a talent. You just can't see it right now because of all the stresses in your life. Keep going. That encouragement, those encouraging words are the best advice I've received. And I've got that advice has come from a lot of people. A lot of people who love me. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing. Similar question, different angle. What's the biggest life lesson you've learned so far?
Biggest life lesson I've learned so far is to not take anything for granted.
Mm.
My family, my loved ones, live every day to the fullest because we're not promised tomorrow. You know,
Isn't
be
that the truth?
thankful for what you have. Yeah. Just be thankful for what you have.
It's been amazing. Thank you so much for sharing your story, for giving us further insights into this story. I couldn't recommend enough. Everybody go out and get yourself a copy of The Notorious Texas Swindler by Pepper Ann. I think this is an incredible story that still has a lot to be told, and can't wait for you to tell it. And I just wish you the very best of luck, and thank you so much for being on the show. It's been an honor.
Thank you. I've had so much fun coming on today. I've really enjoyed myself. Thank
That's
you.
what I like to hear, man. That's it. Well, no, because for me, it's huge. I love my guests to have a good time too. I loved doing this show. I loved looking into the research for this, because I always do research on my guests regardless. But this obviously required me to go that extra step, because it's like you have to understand fully what to ask, but you have to understand why you're asking what you're asking, and obviously, because it'd be very easy to sit there and just ask like the basics, but I like to really delve deep and try and take it that extra step and see where you can take it. And I just love the whole process. So thank you so much. And to the listeners of the Christian Reeve podcast, I hope you enjoyed this show as much as I did. Please go out of your way to check out Pepper Ann's work, and please let me know who you'd like to see on the show next, what you'd like to hear about next. And as always, be safe, be well, and I'll see you in the next one.